Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of the Citizens in Solidarity Vodcast. My name is Andile Kumalo, and I'm still your host as we unearth stories of solidarity originating from the fund. In this particular episode, we'll be chatting to Wendy Klo. She's the Solidarity's Fund Executive Head for a humanitarian response and behavior change pillars. But let's kick off and get to know who Wendy is and what she does, and how is it possible that she is able to fulfill this very important job. And that is why, of course, this month we've called this episode We the People, because that's part of the work that she does. Wendy, welcome. As I've already said, please introduce yourself and also tell us, what do you do in the fund?
Thanks, Andile. It all sounds so massive, doesn't it, when somebody says it? Essentially, when I joined the fund, actually at the behest of a former colleague that I used to work with at Lonman, and she had been recruited into the fund on a pro bono basis, and had asked me to come and support her. And she was the lead, actually, of the humanitarian pillar. And as you know me, my work has always been in the communications, reputation management space. So that was really where I was going to add value to her team. And unfortunately, she took ill. And literally 2 weeks in, I was then asked to take care of the humanitarian pillar.
You speak of changing perceptions. And very often, a lot of us see the work of the Solidarity Fund is a lot more towards the health issues, right? So get the help out there, make sure people have got all the health interventions they need so that they can recover, not contract the coronavirus. Yours was a communication, which was more about, how do we live with this and how do we make sure we don't lose our minds?
I think it's important in communication that people can immediately recognize themselves in that communication and immediately know what it is that they have to take on and do or act or behave in order for them to be part of that movement. The other key fundamental truth that I think one tries to achieve in the communication that one does for the fund and anywhere else, to be honest, is really highlighting the benefits to the individual. Humans are very strange in that way. We like to know what's in it for me. And if that isn't clearly articulated, it's very difficult to shift the needle and to take people along with you. Another key component that's been very important at the fund, I think, in creating communication that has impact and that has traction, has been the co-creation of that communication with key stakeholders. I think it's critically important that we as the fund understand our mandate and our place in society, but also understand the networks and stakeholders that have been in existence longer than we have, and how we then create those relationships that are beneficial, ultimately not to the fund, because that's not who we respond to, but ultimately beneficial to the people of South Africa and moving forward.
We the people, talking about the people.
The people.
Exactly. You then decided to focus on the issue, the scourge, really, very unfortunate scourge of gender-based violence. Was that as a result of you doing research and finding out and anticipating that this is going to be an issue with lockdown and everything? Or did the market move you? Were you quickly told through your networks and those community-based organizations that, hold on, here's the scourge rearing its head again at a different level because of lockdown, and then responded? So how did the fund decide GBV was kind of the initiative to focus on? And then how do you decide which GBV initiatives to support? Because I can imagine there must be thousands of them out there.
Yes, so it was a combination of both, Andile. We did do, through the help of the Gates Foundation, leverage their rapid assessment, which was done, I think, in March or April. That was a study, a very quick study with stakeholders around what the impact of the lockdown was on gender-based violence. But also we had our ears on the ground. I believe, as the fund, are a listening organization, and that's been very important in us being able to be responsive in a crisis. driven by a distinct strategic selection and choice,
Right.
that the humanitarian pillar was going to focus on being responsive to vulnerable communities that were impacted by the lockdown.
So you've had two funding calls for the GBV initiatives. There was one that was very focused on the, let's call it more community-based, and then there's been a recent one that's kind of large-scale initiatives towards GBV. Just give us an update and maybe some examples of the initiatives you've supported. I know there's three pillars. I know there's prevention, response, and legal. Give us a sense. These can all just be words for us, but maybe give me some examples of who does prevention, what kind of stuff do they do, who does response, what kind of support they give to women or victims, and legal is obviously important because you got to take the action, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm being thrust into this position, Andile, as you know, I've learned so much about gender-based violence, and through the network of stakeholders that we've been engaging with as the fund. So we've had, as you say, two calls, one targeted at community-based organizations for funding between 50,000 Rand and 250,000 Rand, and essentially aimed at organizations that provide services for victims across the value chain. And that was very deliberate to say that let us not only be responsive in GBV when somebody has already been victimized. There's a role to play in actually preventing these cases of GBV happening. We're looking at programs that address gender-based norms and behavior change. We're looking at sexual and reproductive health rights. We're looking at communication that drives awareness around social behavior change. We're looking at skills development in the gender-based sector. And then when it comes to response, we're looking at trauma counseling, for instance, the maintenance of shelter services, the capacity building for community care workers and caregivers. And then in the justice system, we're looking for the provision of or organizations that help in the provision of free legal services and paralegal services, as well as supporting victims who are actually in the criminal justice system to get access to fair treatment during that journey that they're experiencing.
So how do your efforts, and particularly your role in the stuff you do for the fund, get affected by where we are in that timeline?
So the social impacts of this pandemic are something that is going to live with us for a long time to come. So the role of the fund, whilst not perhaps as crisis-driven as it was at the beginning, is still a significant role that it can play in terms of normalizing how society behaves whilst the virus is still with us. So to ensure that we are present in the minds and hearts of South Africans to remind them that it is up to us to now behave in a responsible manner now that we find ourselves in alert level 1. But also secondly, to say, how do we then continue to support those vulnerable communities? As the fund, we're keenly aware of the impact of this virus on vulnerable communities.
Absolutely.
And in whatever way we can, we'll continue to play a role, whilst not crisis-driven, but certainly play a role in alleviating some of those impacts on those vulnerable communities.
Thank goodness we've got you, Ms. Wendy Tlo, as the Solidarity Fund's head of a humanitarian response and behavioral change pillars. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress everything that Wendy has said enough. We are not out of this. It is not over. And I'm speaking, of course, to the lady that's driving a lot of the communication about how we should behave. But at the end of the day, we need to heed it, especially we men, when it comes to issues of GBV. Just makes no sense. Just don't do it, especially us, because we are the perpetrators at the end of the day. Wendy, thank you so much for your time, my sister. I really appreciate it. To all of you, ladies and gentlemen, catch us again. We're going to be having a lot more episodes of the Citizens in Solidarity Vodcast. My name is Andile Khumalo. I will see you at our next chat.